Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all the witnesses for their testimony today. Never fails that we learn something from these exercises, and I appreciate very much you taking the time to be with us. Mr. McGregor, I couldn't help but notice in your closing comments something that I've been trying to verbalize for a long time, but putting it succinctly, you say it's time to get out of the courthouse. You know, I couldn't agree more that we need to come together, and I think Ms. Kwan and I were discussing this very same concept. If we look just a little bit north, the Yakima River Basin Enhancement Project I think, truly exemplifies bringing diverse interests and opinions together around one table and working together to come up with solutions. And it seems to me that this is way beyond time that we do that here in the Columbia and Snake River Basin. So thank you for those words. I'm of the school of opinion that the benefits far outweigh the negative aspects of these dams, and that we need to do all we can to make them work for people and for fish. A couple of specific questions. I want to start with Mr. Meyer, if I could. Todd, you talked about the ability of salmon to return and comparing to other rivers. Both statistics tell us a lot about the dammed rivers and the undammed rivers. Could you expound a little bit more about that and make sure that we understand the comparisons there? Are there significant differences between those that are impeded by dams and those rivers that are not? And if not, why do you think that's the case?
So thank you for the question. So I think Dr. Welch actually has done some excellent work on that very question, so maybe he can address that specifically. But what we see very clearly is that the returns across the Pacific Northwest on the Snake, on the Columbia, and Puget Sound are all below where we want them to be. And the reason that you see these sort of consistencies is because of ocean conditions. This is pretty well known that there is a cycle of population, and you see it on the Snake River. In 2019, many of the advocates of destroying the dams argued that the very low population, the very low returns we saw in 2019 was indicative of a long-term trend. That year, I actually joined with Governor Inslee's former salmon advisor and wrote a piece saying, no, this is a cycle and this is a downturn, and what we're about to see is an upturn. And that's exactly what has happened over the next 3 years. So the challenge in identifying the impact of the dams is to determine the signal from the noise. There are so many things that are impacting salmon recovery that you can, anytime there is a downturn, you can blame the dams, and anytime there is an upturn, they say, oh, it's something else that is causing it. So I think that's the real challenge in trying to identify the particular impact of the dams, especially when you see salmon returns across the Northwest struggling, makes it clear that the other problems are much larger.
Thank you. Mr. Dunn, in your testimony, you talk about the issue of total dissolved gases, and that the fact just a few short years ago, fish biologists were concerned that a level of 115% would be detrimental to salmon. And while it's not widely reported, it says that increasing spill to 125%, where I think that's where we are now much of the time. Can you tell me if we are seeing a benefit to the salmon by those increased flows, or are we seeing a detriment like we used to think we would at 115%?
Thank you for the question. I think it helps to go back and also recognize that the increase in spill from the 115% level to 125 was a negotiated deal. And utility off-takers like Benton PUD negotiated a reduction in our contractual rights to electricity. So spill, meaning diverting water over the spillway versus putting it through the turbine generators, has an impact. And after this, negotiated settlement, we lost 4% of our firm contracted rights. So don't forget that. So obviously, as a utility manager, when I come into the game, I'm asking questions and saying, okay, again, kind of restating what you're asking, spilling to a total dissolved gas level of 115% was for years the limit. And that was based on biologists and others recognizing that when you gasify the water, it's harmful to salmon and other aquatic species. So in an attempt to, I think what I'd say, it's being portrayed as kind of a last-ditch effort to get more smolt out to the ocean. We've agreed to this increase from 115 to 120, now to 125. And so now to more direct answer to your question, I think the science is not settled on it yet. I question whether we have adequate in-stream instrumentation to even monitor it adequately. You have to assess the physical state of the smolt as they're going down the river for gas bubble trauma, and so that requires, the ability to get in the river. And the other thing is counting smolt. If they're going over the spillway, it's difficult to impossible to know how many are actually being diverted, and so it's making it difficult to know. And I think the short answer is no, we don't know if it's beneficial. In fact, it could be hurting them, and salmon need 2 to 3 years to get back. Yeah.
Excuse me, if you could wind up, that would be good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. We went over time, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. And Mr. Newhouse for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate this opportunity for a second round of questioning. If we look back at last fall's report that was requested by Governor Inslee and Senator Murray, and even if we look further back a couple of years to Representative Simpson's project proposing the removal of the Snake River dams, they make a statement in there that's similar to what I heard, Ms. Kwan, you made reference to and I don't have, unfortunately, your testimony in front of me, so I apologize I don't have all the specifics, but you talked about the fact that important services would need to be replaced in the event of breaching of the dams. Both of those other reports I referred to also said that power generated from the Snake River dams would have to be replaced and operational before any breaching could occur. So, and this question is for, everyone and anyone in particular. Mr. Hairston maybe has a thought, Mr. Dunn, maybe all of you do. Since we do not have the ability to replace the power that's generated by the Snake River dams today, currently, in fact, if I said earlier, it would take 6,000 acres of solar panels to achieve the output that the 4 lower Snake River dams provide, and that only happens during the daylight hours. So we still don't even have it with that. Shouldn't this discussion, this argument, almost it's really just an exercise in futility at this point, since we do not have the ability to replace that power. So. Any response, Mr. Hairston? Perhaps we could start with you.
Yes, thanks for the question, Congressman Newhouse. And so I would say that we have put together a study. We initiated a study to look at replacement of the lower snake dams. And yes, we're at a point in time when we are having those discussions about what it would take, and the Murray Inslee report did identify, like you said, the need to have replacement resources in place. As I said in my testimony, the study indicated that it would cost anywhere between $11.2 and $19.2 billion in present value to replace what's given, what we have today. It also looked at replacing anywhere between 2,300 to 4,300 megawatts in resources. So what you were saying in terms of the solar panels is on the right track. It would take an enormous amount of resources according to the study. And then also the annual cost could run anywhere between $415 million to $860 million per annual by 2045, according to the study that we commissioned. And then the last thing I would share with you is that It also indicated an increased cost to public power customers anywhere between $100 to $230 per household per year by 2045. So yes, we have looked at, or we commissioned the study, Bonneville did, to look at replacement. There are varying opinions on it, but the bottom line is that we did see significant costs in doing that.
Thank you. Mr. Dunn, do you have any reaction?
I'll make it quick. I don't want to get you in trouble. Just remember, if you're going to replace controllable technology that can balance supply and demand like hydro, there really is no equivalent technology on the table in Washington and Oregon. Oregon has taken new natural gas off the table. It's illegal to build a new natural gas plant. Washington, while it's not illegal, has made it so it's cost prohibitive. Nobody's in their right mind is going to build a new natural gas plant in Washington. So, to answer your question, what you do to replace hydro with wind and solar and batteries is you play a probability game. And we're increasingly playing a probability game that there'll be adequate wind, and there'll be adequate sun plus storage. And it was already mentioned earlier, multi-day cold snaps are windless and often cloudy. So I hope that helps. But we've cornered ourselves, and we really have no replacement technology. It can do it affordably also.
Thank you very much. That absolutely helps, and I appreciate you explaining that in terms to make this conversation almost academic, and the fact that we should be spending our time on how can we continue to allow dams and salmon to coexist instead of eliminating one of the most important sources of energy that we've ever seen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.